thank you so much for joining us today. I think this is an incredibly important topic and hopefully of keen interest to those of you who do believe there is a space to create highly successful companies that also have a broader impact on the world. And really, it's amazing to me every time I come to TiEcon and seeing a conference like this where so many of the innovative technologies that we're talking about are really framed as changing the world, whether it's AI or virtual reality or self-driving cars. And these things are hugely transformational. But I think we all know that there's something broader about changing the world that is actually profound and certainly keenly important to the topic here. And really what we're going to do is really step back in this panel and ask the question, is it possible to create viable, successful business models that from the beginning, right, at the startup stage, have integrated social purpose and social impact into the fabric and mission of the company? And I would argue that we are at the kind of early stages of what I believe is becoming a movement in that regard. And what you have up here on stage, every one of us are doing something in that space today. So very, very quickly, to give you a context on the panel today, we have on the far right side, Zach Marks. Zach heads up new products for Tala. If you are not familiar with Tala yet, please check it out. This is a phenomenal company. I got to meet their CEO and founder a few years ago back in Mumbai. They are one of the most successful, if not the most successful fintech company in this emerging space. Have delivered over 1 million loans to date, just raised a $30 million B round, so really exciting company. I'll have Zach talk more about that. We have in the center here, Sarah Gordon, who is founder of Square Organics. Super exciting company. I will apologize up front for bringing up the topic of delicious food, healthy snacks right as we head into the lunch break, but I think you'll be super impressed with some of the things Sarah has to say. Not only a delightful person, but a real true caliber entrepreneur who I think is changing the game in a really important field of food, and certainly the most colorful of all of us up here. I would love to have a slide like that to set up my business. We also have Navroze Mehta. If those of you are not familiar with Mela, Artisans, they are really changing the game in a field that lots of folks have dabbled in, but I don't think anybody has really taken it to the level that Mela has done yet. Really bringing lifestyle brands and quality products into a luxury space in the developed world that really takes off-the-grid artisans and plugs them into that global economy in a profound way and actually making a viable business out of it. And then sort of to bring it all at home, we've asked Mark Bauhaus, who has a long career in the tech industry, running very large business units at companies like Sun Microsystems, Juniper, and has now moved into the venture world and has this crazy idea that you can actually fund successful startups that have this intersection between profit and purpose. And they have a growing portfolio with a lot of the kind of companies that we're talking about here today. So ask Mark to be on the panel, really to give that perspective of an investor. How do you look at companies like this? So with no further ado, let me go ahead and just jump right in. And Zach, I'm going to start off with you over here. So your company obviously is in the fintech space, which is white hot. There's clearly huge potential to make money in that space. As we all have seen, there's also potential to sort of cross that line and get into exploitive loans, especially when you're giving sort of microcredit to vulnerable populations. Maybe just talk to us a little bit about the Tala business model.
Yep.
And how you bridge that gap and what your lessons learned have been so far.
Sure. Thanks again for having me. So just to begin, so everyone is on the same page of what Tala does, so we really started off by focusing on a problem, which is expanding access to fair, flexible financial services across emerging markets. And really, to give people access to financial services, they need to have a financial identity. The challenge is so for all of us here in this room, presumably maybe you have a credit card or you've taken a home loan or something like that. You're able to do that because there's a lot of data about you, right? You have an existing credit score, you have bank accounts. The challenge is for, let's say, 2 to 3 billion people in the world, there's really no financial data about them. So they don't have a financial identity, even if they are credit-worthy to receive a loan. So we started off trying to solve that problem. And I think even just like a meta point about social impact is I think it's important to understand that we always started out to solve a problem, not to build a company, like not to build a tech company, not to build a nonprofit, which is actually how we started off, but it was really just, we're trying to solve this problem, and what's the best way to do it? So the way we solve this problem is, of all these people with no credit scores, pretty much a lot of them have phones now, and your phone is a great walking data source, right? You understand who you're talking to, where you're talking to them, if you're sending mobile money, all sorts of data. So we take that data and we build a credit score, and then we use that credit score to extend short-term microloans. Now you asked a really great question, and someone from the previous panel had talked about predatory lending a bit, and I think it's a really important thing for us to address head on, right? There have been, the microfinance revolution did a lot of great things, but it also had some notorious not so great things about it, about trapping people in sort of these debt treadmills, and you really have to be, think about being a responsible lender. So I think a really exciting thing about what we're doing is, even from the beginning, we've always taken this sort of social impact lens into how we're doing our lending. So we don't just measure sort of growth, like number of loans and lending profits, but we also are measuring our impact on creating people's financial identities. So we take someone who before had no, say in Kenya, they had no credit score. Now, by taking some loans and paying us back, they do have a credit score, and they can actually get graduated from us and go to larger formal financial institutions to take loans. But I think it's really interesting thinking constantly about these trade-offs of, if we could increase the interest rate a little bit more and make a little bit more money, but then are we being true to our mission of providing the best product for someone? I think what's a really encouraging thing, just to wrap up these opening remarks, is that we've found in general that applying the principle that what does have the best impact on our customer actually does make the most business sense in the long run. So you can think about maybe like squeezing a few more dollars out of someone in some short-term loan, but actually, if instead you just do what is right for the customer, you have that relationship for a longer term, and then you actually get a lot more of them out of that customer in the long run. And so I can share more anecdotes about that as we go.
Awesome point.
Yeah.
So do algorithms have bias too, or is that sort of like
yeah,
not
right.
an issue?
So a great question. I mean, I think there is this great conversation, which is, okay, so you have these data-based algorithms which replace a lot of the inherent human biases we all have. I mean, there's stories about women trying to go into banks and just being rejected by male bankers, or tribal or caste discrimination, or here in the U.S., like a long history of racial discrimination in lending. And the idea of lending based on a data-based algorithm is to get rid of some of those human biases we have, but of course algorithms have their own bias. And so I think one thing that we're really proud of as a company is tackling that head on and sort of monitoring our algorithms so that we're not having discriminatory impacts. I mean, little ways we do this is in Kenya, for example, we won't take into account someone's last name in doing our credit scores. Of course you could. You might find, if we just only lend to this last name versus that last name, that would increase our repayment rate by X%. But you'd likely be discriminating based on some marginalized tribe, so we're trying not to do that.
Great. So Sarah, I want to turn to you now, and we talked a little bit in Zach's opening comments about this idea of when you go down this path, some people start with a specific social cause or mission that they have, and then try to figure out, is there any way to build a market-driven engine that can drive that sustainably? Others sort of start on the other end and think, I get this great idea for a business, now can I actually do good and not just make money off it? Maybe talk a little bit about Square Organics and the genesis of your story, because I love some of the that thought process that went into it.
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who don't know, Square Organics is a plant-based organic protein bar company, and then later in this year we are going to actually go outside of bars. So we really started the company wanting to create products that were good for the environment as well as making a good social impact, which I think environmentalism has a lot to do with social impact as well. So I think that for a company like ours, and I think that in our industry it might be a little bit more simplified with impact sourcing. So I can choose where I'm buying my ingredients from. So whenever we're making those choices, we're looking at that what impact is that going to make, and making sure to hold ourselves accountable we did make sure that it was embedded in our ethos. It's been our mission, it's been in our vision from the beginning, and we make sure to hold ourselves accountable. And I think that making commitments from the beginning and doing what you can, but when you do make the commitments from the beginning, it's going to be easier when you are raising money, that you are going to be in bed with investors that are going to have the same social missions themselves. And I think that, something that Darren had mentioned on the last panel was, talking about making sure that it's embedded even with, with acquisition of your brand and things like that.
And then you guys took the extra step to decide you were also going to give back to a cause you cared about that was, sort of tied into this. Maybe talk about that.
Sure, and the reason that I was asked to be on the panel was because of my relationship with Mark, to my left. So we did a seed round of funding with Just Business, and Just Business was created to help a nonprofit called Not for Sale. And Not for Sale is a leader in fighting human trafficking. We believe that no person is for sale, that everyone deserves to be born free and remain free. So Not for Sale, they have rehabilitation projects for people that have suffered from human trafficking, as well as trying to work upstream and prevent human trafficking. It's over $150 billion a year black market industry, and the second fastest growing black market industry as well. It's a huge problem, and it's something that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about a 7-year-old girl getting sold, as a sex slave. So we try to talk a lot about it in our marketing at a store level. We are a product that's sold like nationwide with Whole Foods. We do a lot of in-store demos, and we try to spread the message as much as possible through our brand ambassadors. But yes, we did decide to donate 1% of our net sales to Not for Sale, to make sure that we are making an impact with every single bar that we sell.
Very, very cool. Thank you. So, Navroze, let me turn to you here. So, you've obviously had a rich business career. You've done a lot of things and had a lot of success through that career. I suspect that in all those businesses, you wanted to create sort of a win-win environment between yourself and suppliers and all that. I also suspect that Mela may be the first time where a core part of your mission was maximizing profits of your suppliers. Mm-hmm. So maybe talk about that process and what was that like to get your head around that? Was it easy? Was it something that just sort of cut against the grain of your business background? How do you think about that?
So maybe just as a starter, for those of you who maybe not familiar with Mela Artisans, we started Mela Artisans about 6 years ago. My daughter Sonali and I started it, and the genesis of it was really a crisis. We have a crisis in India. We are losing our artisanal base at an alarming rate of 1% a year. So over the last 30 years, we've lost 30% of our artisans permanently, and it's continuing. So that was our call to action, is that it's our heritage. It's something that you want to protect. Imagine if we had that going on in this country. So it was something that was really important to us, and so that was the problem that we were looking to solve. And the challenge was that local markets just were not supporting our incredible artisans. These artisans had this heritage from hundreds of years, from the time of the Taj, and whether it's marble, you can choose, I don't know if you guys know, but handicrafts are the second largest industry in India after agriculture. And there's thousands of artisans that are very fragmented, but their livelihood depends on their continuing to do what they're doing. So it's a huge challenge. It's a very difficult problem to solve, but that obviously didn't stop us, as you can see. But it is a very difficult challenge. And I think to what Wes was relating to, the part of our challenge was that there were many sourcing houses and many places that were working with artisans, with middlemen, that really squeezed the artisan and didn't allow them to make a living wage, which is what caused some of this challenge, in addition to the local markets not supporting them because of handmade products not being appreciated. So our challenge was to create a difference, not to play the cost game, but to create beautiful designs that were relevant to the audiences where these products were going to be sold, in this case, the States. And to design, we were agnostic to where in the entire retail supply chain we wanted to design for. So we have designed for Bergdorf and Neiman's, but we also designed for TJ Maxx. So it's the entire retail chain, and the whole point was artisans we want to keep their traditional techniques and materials and crafts, but we want to give them fresh designs and that's the only way you can cause impact, because if it doesn't sell, you'll have no impact. So I think that's the important element of what we do, is we are a design house that has created this platform that works with, last year, we gave over 1,000 artisans full-time work, and there's no limit. We should be doing 10 times that, honestly. There's no, really, the communities are so huge and they're so scalable that there's no limit to that. And to Wes's point, there is a fine line. I think that if you create beautiful designs and if you produce a product that is meaningful, that is differentiated, I think all of you, including a lot of millennials, will want to have complete transparency in the supply chain, and they will pay more. They will pay for a beautifully handcrafted product. And that's the challenge, is don't squeeze the artisans. Give them their living and fair wage. Make sure they make a fair profit, but then let your product speak for itself. The product should be beautiful in its own right, and the story should be said. It should never be the other way around. The product should be beautiful, it should be exquisite, and the story should be an augmentation to that beautiful product. And then you potentially have success.
Awesome. Perfectly well said. So Mark, I'd like to come back around to you now. And so obviously you had a long career in Silicon Valley, and investing in tech companies is sort of a newer thing for you. And it always struck me in sort of throughout my career, I mean, it is really, really hard to find that product market fit, get the flywheel going as a startup. I mean, there's so many things against you. Why in the world would you take on this challenge of from a VC saying, on top of all that challenge, we're going to add social impact to that as another constraint?
Yeah, good question. Well, a couple answers. One is I believe there is such a thing as a citizen entrepreneur, one that actually believes in the common good, and that's maybe a bit of altruism. But I'll cast that aside for just a minute and go back to the technology experience and background that I had the privilege of being part of. The internet revolution was huge, right? It remade our entire economy globally, and it's still doing it. It was pervasive and deep, and it was based on a couple of innovations around connecting people. I actually think that the opportunity ahead is bigger. It's much bigger. In the next few decades, we're going to remake pretty much everything in the entire economy for two things. One is sustainability, long term, addressing the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle that are out of balance, and inclusion, second. And that those opportunities in virtually every sector, whether it's paper clips, it's lending, it's artisans, it's food, it's renewable energy, is an opportunity for citizen entrepreneurs to be even more competitive, have more differentiation, have larger markets and greater profit margins by addressing those issues. So for me, it's actually an upside, bigger opportunity, and that's the place to start when designing a business that has these three, impact around profit, people, and planet at the same time.
Yeah, and by the way, I think if you actually spend any time looking at some of the data on this, I mean, everything that we're starting to see now backs that up. I mean, look at the social indices, companies that actually make this this sort of step that we think is courageous and hard, they perform better, they deliver better returns to stakeholders. There is not sort of this trade-off that I think we often see in the early stage of being a pioneer. So maybe just a question out to the overall panel. So. How do you balance, financial goals with social impact goals? And sort of a follow-on, question to that is, does it depend on sort of the stage of the company? Maybe early stage, where you're still trying to get that product market fit. You can sort of put those things aside and then get into it when you get bigger and get more profit. Does it depend on the economy and bad economic times? You can sort of let that take because you got to survive. I mean, how do you guys think about that? Sure.
I was just going to say that. I think that it's really important, and since this is an entrepreneurial conference, I think it is really important to build it into the ethos from the beginning. It only gets harder and harder. I think that people have the mindset of going in and they're like, oh, well, when I scale, I'll do good, But the unfortunate thing about that is that the more you scale, the harder it gets and the worse your cash flow is. And it's just more money, more problems, So I think that it's really important that you build it at the beginning, and kind of going off of what Mark was saying, that, and I don't think it's just millennials. Being a millennial myself, I mean, I definitely think that our generation is, more focused on it. But now with technology, there has to be transparency. So you're doing yourself a favor by embedding it from the beginning, because you have to do it. I mean, obviously not everybody is, but it's not maybe as difficult as you think. You just, every time you're making a decision, you have it in mind.
So, in the case of Mela, it was quite easy because we started the company pretty much for that purpose, which was to cause impact. But I think you made a very good point, Wes, is you can't switch it on and off. I think in the very hard times, we give 1% of actually our revenues to artisans. The main impact is obviously the orders, but it goes beyond that. They could have, some of them have never had their eyes examined ever, and they're artisans, if you can imagine that. So the additional 1% could go for eye camps that give them glasses, etc. So there's a need beyond the orders, which is the primary source of impact. But I think you can't switch that on and off. I think even, it's been very painful sometimes when we've had very challenging financial times, but we've not compromised on the 1%. That goes back to the artisans. Those programs need to continue. And the first thing we do in our board meetings is we talk about our impact measurements first, because we don't want to drink our own Kool-Aid and think that we are doing wonderful work. You have to show the impact in real terms. How many artisans, how do we measure their income, etc. So I think those have to be part of the DNA of the company if you really are an impact company. Yeah. And it's not one or the other.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. As a philosophy, there are a number of companies that think about 3 bottom lines, triple bottom line, and that's sort of in the parlance. We actually think that's a mistake, that the intersection of purpose and profit is something that has to be built into the DNA from the beginning, and that the CEO and staff and the decisions, strategic decisions, product design, all have to exercise. It's sort of like coming back to the traffic circle of social, environmental, profit, impact at the same time, and making sure decisions are actually building on each other from a supply chain design perspective, even business model and margin, to have impact on all 3 areas, both to prevent the backlash that can happen if you kind of put that off till later and blow it and people call you on it can kill a company, but also to create the upside opportunity. So really for us it's a simultaneous equation. It's something you have to build into the DNA early on as a way to be more differentiated, more competitive, as a kind of an offensive weapon rather than sort of as an afterthought.
So here you have a very enlightened VC. Now, for those, no offense to investors who might be in the room, but I've certainly been in a lot of these meetings where that sort of cold hard light of day focus on the dollar is sort of everything. I'd love to hear from the entrepreneurs on the panel. What was that like going through that process? I mean, did you find that there's 9 people in the world who want to invest in companies like this? Is it like a growing trend? I mean, how was that experience like?
I can share some anecdotes. Sorry, I'll share some anecdotes from Tala's historic fundraising from venture capitalists. And I think it's a really good point Sarah mentioned about setting it up from the beginning that we are this mission-driven organization, that it's not like, oh, we'll get to that later, because it just won't. The more money you take from more people, it's not going to happen. I think one thing that has enabled us to stay focused on that social impact has been the investors we've chosen and the staff we choose to hire, right? You really have to screen for that if you're an entrepreneur here who's thinking about this from the beginning, because when we were out for various rounds of fundraising, we might meet with an investor who maybe perceives us, who likes the social impact but just doesn't really get it. They're like, oh, Africa, that's my favorite country, or oh, safaris, right? Or they kind of think we're a charity project. So then they just don't really get it. On the other hand, you might have people who are just they are more just, it's good to be focused on profits, but maybe if they're exclusively focused on profits and don't even think to ask the question of the impact you have on your customers, by bringing them on your board, you might then have blinders on to, if we are, having this algorithmic bias or trapping people in debt or something like that, because they're just not going to ask that question. They only care about the profit. So I think one thing that's enabled our success has been bringing on board members who are very, very supportive. And one good screen for that is we just brought on a new board member for our Series B, and as soon as we closed the deal, the first thing he said was, it wasn't like, I can't wait to meet the team or see your numbers or whatever. It was like, I can't wait to meet our customers. I want to meet some people who have taken Tala loans and what that's done for them.
Awesome. Either of you have thoughts?
We haven't done a lot of fundraising, which is just in food would be very unique for tech as well. I mean, food is very similar to tech these days, and we often joke in the industry that there's a food bubble going on. My husband and I, who are the founders of the company, we, after doing a seed round with Just Business, we really decided that we wouldn't do another round until we hit 10 million, which for us is right around the corner, but we're still going to try to hold off as much as possible because although we have Just Business and we were so fortunate, there are a lot of, as you guys have seen on the panels, a lot of banks that are really open to being a part of our cause and the social impact. So we have there's also a great opportunity now with getting lines of credit and things like that. So we are more likely to go in that direction with our next step, hopefully, because we've set ourselves up as being now profitable, and we're in a really good position to go that route. Just Business is really different, I have to say. I mean, I met David Batstone, who is with Just Business. I was 8 months pregnant. And most VCs would be like, I don't think so. I have a lot of friends who are women entrepreneurs who they go into meetings and they literally say, do you plan to have a family? Things like that. And I'm sure women in the room can relate to that. So, I think that investors all would agree that they invest in the entrepreneur, they invest in the founders, and they really believed in us. And we've been really fortunate to, and Just Business has been great too because, they want as much equity in our company as possible. So they don't want to be diluted. So they've been really big cheerleaders for us to continue to grow in income.
So we have time for just a couple more questions in the interest of time. And so I think one thing I'd love to hear is, folks out in the audience who are probably have thought about, is this something that's in my future? Maybe consider starting a company on this front. Sort of think about, you've all been down this journey for a bit now. What are some of the biggest surprises you've had, and how would you translate that into advice for someone who's maybe they're in school, maybe they're a mid-career person looking at, I want to go take my experience, my passion in business, and turn it into something with impact. I mean, what have you learned that you'd give them as a piece of advice?
I think the first thing I would say is that expect the unexpected. I think it's the obvious, advice to tell you that you can write whatever business plan you may have up front, but as you go down the road, and especially in a field that you're somewhat pioneering in terms of something that's very difficult, expect to be flexible and to kind of roll with the punches. I think we've had some challenges in terms of how to reach the artisans. How do we make sure that we were very fortunate to kind of also talk about your previous question. We did look for impact investors who really understood. We wanted an investor that really understood our mission, and we were very fortunate to have an investor like Avishkar, who is a very significant investor, an impact investor in India, invest in IE round. And I think they understood what we needed to do. They've been amazing partners in the journey of measuring impact and doing that. But I think there are many challenges that come along the way, and I think the key is to, I think like Vinod Khosla said very well yesterday, was to just keep going and extending the runway and just managing to really iterate, and I think I've had to do that many, many times with Mela. I can't tell you how many sleepless nights you have on trying to figure out how you're going to change the model so that you can, because it's all aspects of the business are new and different. So I think the key, is being prepared, making sure you have the runway that you need, and I think the most important thing again is the team, is to hire amazing people and keep at it, and just don't let your guard down in hiring the best. Don't compromise on that.
I'll go off of that. I was going to say the team is so important, whether it's your investors or your actual team, which of course your investors are part of your team. You will have a culture regardless of if you build it or not, so you might as well build it, and you can build the people around you to lift you up and keep you accountable, and be positive. You know, it is a fucking roller coaster. It is like nonstop, up and down, up and down, up and down. So you have to ride it. You have to ride the waves, and the people around you are going to, you know, really impact your lives. So I would say surround yourselves with good people and that have, you know, the same mindset as you, but also very different than you, so that they can balance out your shortfalls.
I'll add two quick ones. These are all perfect, right on kind of the headline list. One of them is the laws of physics apply here too in entrepreneurship, that a product has to be, have a great business model, have great differentiation, and really be much better than the competition. And you add in impact, and you're even that much stronger in competitiveness, typically in margin and kind of overall story and strength. But the laws of physics matter, and the fundamentals have to be strong, or else don't pursue it. That's one. Second, there are a lot more tools than I realized, and more every year. Impact investing didn't exist 10 years ago. Today, there are lots of standards that can help. There are auditing procedures that you can leverage off of and not have to reinvent the wheel. For this crowd in electronics, the EICC, Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition, gives a tremendous set of guidelines that kind of fall out of the UN Millennial Goals, but are more specific to electronics. If you're in footwear or apparel, you can look at the Higgs Index and the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and on. Every industry has got, and there's the OSC Squared, is a West Coast very good initiative around sustainability and supply chain for people in the food industry. So there's more and more tools. We didn't get to benefit corporations and B Corps, but there's a whole bunch of ways to build into the DNA of a company and into the supply chain and practices that you can leverage without having to reinvent the wheel.
Including protecting yourself for future acquisitions and making sure the mission has perpetuity and all that.
Yep.
So I know we're coming up the last couple minutes, so just a kind of a speed round for closing comments. I'd love you to put on your prognosticator hat briefly and sort of fast forward 5 or 10 years down the road, right? So you're all pioneers in something that there's an early stage movement. When we get down 10 years from now, are social impact kinds of companies, ones that are along the lines of what you're trying to do, is it still like a niche thing that's only over in these little pockets? Is it pervasive and everywhere? I mean, how far do we get in this adventure?
Take it away.
Well, I think, I don't think, I mean, I think from the beginning, I think if you stay in a niche, that's probably very confining. I think you need to be mainstream. I think that was something we made a decision on at Mela, which is why I think our vision 10 years from now is that any beautiful handcrafted product from India, whether it's at Bergdorf or TX, the Mela brand speaks for that. It talks about handcrafted, beautiful artisan products, and it's omnipresent, whether it's online or offline, and it should speak, the transparency should be there. You should be able to see a video or know the artisan that made your product. That should be, and it should be, whether it's a beautiful bowl on your dining table or something exquisite in your living room, it should speak about the artisan who made it, and it should be a beautiful story that goes along with it. So I think being niche-y, so I'll give you the analogy of, like, let's say a 10,000 Villages, which is an amazing organization, but it's a very niche kind of a person who goes there, versus something that can be available anywhere to anyone. I think we need to broaden our horizons and not be put into a box, and I think that's the important aspect of how you can really, really scale.
Yeah. I think it's really exciting over the last decade or so that there's more of these panels talking about social impact, and that big companies now pretty much all have CSR departments, and that's really exciting to do it at scale. I think when it comes down to it, I mean, your question is this still going to always just be this little niche thing, or is it going to be everything? It really has to come down to economics, which is going to come down to what customers want. And as long as customers demand that we don't want to buy soap that like destroys rainforests and stuff, then Unilever will make soap that doesn't destroy rainforests, absent some government regulation that like prohibits them. Like for us, the way we'll continue to be huge, or we will scale even more, is that we think we've stumbled upon a business model that does enable social impact, but really enables profits, which lets us scale. And without the two, like I think we like you said, we have to get out of a mindset of triple bottom line, because it doesn't quite work. Like the reason why we have that third is that it used to just be like the domain of nonprofits, or just like non-scalable grant-funded social enterprises. And so the work on social entrepreneurs is to come up with business models that really just make profits, but happen to also have social impact at the same time.
Great.
I know we're out of time. Go Patch, a big thinking. We're in for a boom time, I think, in this space because there's two cycles that are wildly out of control. One is the carbon cycle, and I'll call the other one the genie cycle. So economic inclusion and getting kind of the climate back on track create an opportunity for innovation that is unparalleled, and people will, around here, especially entrepreneurs, will find that, create businesses, and go grow. I think the disparity, we were having a little streak of narcissism and corruption in our country, and I think the disparity in 10 years from now is going to be very remarkable. There'll be companies that really are operating in a horrible short-term way that will be called by consumers who won't put up with it, and there'll be companies and entrepreneurs who have done what we talked about today who are going to be wildly successful, and it'll be very clear the disparity.
Awesome. Sarah, closing word.
Quick. So just again, going back to the millennial thing, I mean, people want products with a purpose. I mean, it's just the way that things are moving. I definitely think it is the future. And if you don't get on the bandwagon, I think you're going to be in serious trouble. That's why all these large brands like Unilever are buying Ben & Jerry's. I mean, they're wanting to get on the bandwagon. They haven't built it into their ethos, and now it's too late. So they're having to buy other companies so that they can start to show consumers like, hey guys, we care too, we care too. So I definitely think it's the future. You can already see with, in my industry with big food, they're all buying up these cool little brands, and hopefully they don't destroy them. But I think it's definitely what consumers are looking for. And if we continue to do our B2B with impact in mind, it will continue to just drive things in that direction. That as consumers ourselves, you vote every time you purchase something, and that's, I think, that the way that we should really be looking at it.
So go to Sprouts or Whole Foods or Nob Hill today and buy yourself some Square bars. You won't regret it, and you'll do good for the world. Thank you so much to the panelists. Fabulous insights. I wish you could hear more from them. Also, thanks to the audience. I hope it was useful for you, and I'll let you go to lunch now. Thank you.